FBI boss ambushed by rogue cops, fights back on Route 66. The night of November 10, 2015, draped a heavy silence over a deserted stretch of Route 66, the iconic American highway winding through the Midwest like a forgotten scar on the landscape. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of frost, and the sky above was a deep indigo, dotted with stars that seemed to watch the unfolding drama below with cold indifference. A sleek black sedan glided along the cracked asphalt, its polished surface catching the occasional flicker of a rusted streetlight, casting fleeting reflections that danced like ghosts in the darkness. Behind the wheel sat Veronica Caldwell, the newly appointed FBI director, a black woman whose ascent from the gritty streets of Harlem to the apex of federal law enforcement had been a testament to resilience, intellect, and unyielding defiance. Veronica had spent her day in St. Louis, locked in a classified briefing with regional task force leaders, poring over intelligence on a domestic terror cell with suspected ties to local law enforcement. The reports were chilling, whispers of a planned attack on Veterans Day, just one day away, targeting a memorial event in the city. Her appointment as the first black female FBI director, announced 3 months prior, had sent shockwaves through the agency and beyond. Some hailed her as a trailblazer, a symbol of progress in a nation still grappling with its racial demons. Others, particularly the old guard, saw her as a threat, a woman who dared to climb too high, too fast. She'd received hate mail, her office door defaced with slurs, and anonymous calls warning her to watch her back. But Veronica Caldwell didn't flinch. Her mother, a nurse who'd stitched up protesters during the civil rights movement, had raised her with a mantra: "You fight, V, or they win." Her speedometer glowed a steady 65 miles per hour, right at the legal limit, a habit born from years as a Harlem beat cop where precision could mean survival. She'd always been meticulous, her sharp mind honed by decades of navigating a system that often saw her as a target rather than an ally. The road was empty, save for the occasional tumbleweed skittering across her path, a lonely reminder of the Midwest's vast, desolate beauty. She adjusted her rearview mirror, her dark eyes scanning the horizon out of habit, her fingers drumming lightly on the steering wheel to the faint strains of jazz from the radio. A Miles Davis track, "So What?", that her father had loved to play on Sunday mornings when she was a child. Her mind was still in the briefing room, replaying the grainy surveillance photos of suspected operatives, the coded messages intercepted by her team, the chilling realization that some local cops might be complicit. She'd pushed for a deeper investigation, demanding access to personnel records, a move that had earned her glares from the St. Louis PD chief, a man with a reputation for protecting his own, no matter the cost. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden explosion of red and blue lights in her rearview mirror, a siren wailing like a wounded beast, shattering the night's stillness. Veronica's heart jolted, her breath catching for a split second before her training kicked in. She glanced at the speedometer, still 65, not a fraction over. No swerving, no broken taillights, no reason for this. The patrol car clung to her bumper, its lights strobing with an intensity that felt personal, predatory. She narrowed her eyes, her mind racing through possibilities. A routine stop? A mistake? Or something darker? Something tied to the enemies she'd made in her short tenure? She exhaled sharply, her grip tightening on the wheel as she signaled and pulled over to the gravel shoulder, the crunch of pebbles under her tires a stark contrast to the siren's wail. The patrol car stopped inches behind her, its headlights blinding in her mirrors. She killed the engine, the jazz fading into silence, and waited, her senses on high alert. This wasn't her first encounter with law enforcement overreach. She'd been pulled over before, a black woman in a suit often mistaken for trouble rather than authority. But tonight something felt off, a gut instinct honed by years of survival. The silence stretched, each second a deliberate taunt. No officer emerged. Veronica's lips curled into a wry smirk, her Harlem drawl slipping out as she muttered, "Guess they're polishing their badges for the Queen. Hope they brought a crown while they're at it." Her humor was a shield, but beneath it, her pulse quickened. When the driver's door finally creaked open, a towering figure stepped out. Officer Hankins, his heavy-set frame silhouetted against the flashing lights, his left hand hovering over his holster like a coiled rattlesnake. His eyes, cold and predatory, locked onto her through the window, stripping her of rank with a single dismissive glance. "License and registration," he barked, his voice a low growl, devoid of courtesy or protocol. Veronica arched an eyebrow, her tone firm but laced with a challenge. "Mind telling me why I'm pulled over, officer? Or is this a new FBI initiation ritual I missed in the memo?" He chewed his gum slowly, his smirk widening into a sneer that sent a chill down her spine. "License, registration, move it." Her gut screamed ambush. This wasn't a stop, it was a hunt. Veronica's mind raced as Hankins loomed outside her window, his hand still on his holster, a silent promise of violence. She'd faced worse. Cartel hitmen in her early days, corrupt senators during her tenure as a field agent. But this felt different, personal. Her appointment as FBI director had made enemies, men who saw her as a threat to their power, a black woman who dared to climb too high. She'd received death threats, her office vandalized with slurs, and now this, an isolated road, a lone patrol car, and an officer who looked at her like she was prey, not a superior. She kept her voice steady, her eyes locked on his, her training keeping her calm despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. "Officer, I'm Director Veronica Caldwell, FBI. I'm asking for the reason for this stop. You're required to provide it, unless you skip that page in the manual during training." Her tone carried the weight of authority, but also a flicker of the Harlem street kid who'd learned to talk her way out of trouble. Her voice a blend of steel and sass that had carried her through 1,000 battles. Hankins didn't flinch, his sneer growing as he chewed his gum louder, the wet smack echoing in the tense silence like a metronome counting down to chaos. "I don't care who you are, lady. License. Registration. Now." His voice was a low growl, each word a deliberate provocation, daring her to push back. His hand tightening on his holster with a faint click that sent her heart racing. Her instincts screamed trap. She reached into her purse, her movements slow and deliberate, her eyes never leaving his, watching for any sudden move. She pulled out her driver's license and FBI badge, the gold emblem gleaming under the patrol car's headlights, a symbol of her hard-won authority. "Here's my ID, officer. Federal agent, director of the FBI. Now, I'll ask again, why am I being stopped? And don't give me some half-baked excuse about a broken taillight, because I check my car every morning." She held the badge up, letting it catch the light, a silent challenge, her voice steady but edged with a warning. Hankins barely glanced at it, his eyes flicking back to her with a look of contempt that made her skin crawl. "Fancy badge for a fancy lady. Step out of the car, now." His hand tightened on his holster, the unclipped snap a clear threat, his body language screaming aggression, his bulk blocking the moonlight as he leaned closer to her window. A chill raced down her spine, her training kicking into overdrive. This wasn't protocol, it was a power play, and a dangerous one. "On what grounds?" she demanded, her voice a blade, cutting through the night. "You need probable cause, officer. I know the law better than you know your own name. Try me." Her words were a challenge, her eyes boring into his, searching for a crack in his facade. But all she saw was a man itching for a fight. He stepped closer, his bulk now inches from her window, his right hand now gripping his gun, the holster unclipped with a faint click that echoed like a gunshot in her ears. "I don't need a reason, not for you. Step out, or I make you." His voice dripped with venom, the unspoken threat hanging heavy between them, his sneer twisting into something uglier, something that told her this wasn't just about a traffic stop. Veronica's breath slowed, her mind racing through scenarios, each one darker than the last. Refusal could escalate. He was itching for a fight, his body coiled like a spring, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous hunger. Compliance might not mean safety. She'd seen too many routine stops end in blood, especially for people who looked like her, black and unafraid in a world that often punished both. She'd been pulled over before, her suit and badge no shield against the slurs and assumptions, the driving while black stops that had haunted her since her teens in Harlem. But this was different. This was targeted, a setup, and she could feel it in her bones. Before she could decide, the roar of another engine shattered the silence. A second patrol car screeching to a stop behind Hankins, its lights strobing red and blue, casting an eerie glow over the scene that turned the night into a war zone. Not backup for her, reinforcements for him. Officer Dawson stepped out, broader than Hankins, his nameplate swallowed by the headlight glare, his face a mask of cold authority, his own hand resting on his holster as he strode forward. He glanced at Hankins, then at Veronica, his voice a low rumble that sent a shiver down her spine. "What's the holdup here?" Hankins sneered, never taking his eyes off her, his voice a snarl. "She's resisting, non-compliant, thinks she's too good for us." "Resisting what?" Veronica snapped, her voice a whip, her patience fraying at the edges. "Your bad attitude? I'm the FBI director, and you're out of line. Step back before you dig a deeper hole than you can climb out of." Her badge was still in her hand. A silent challenge, but Dawson ignored it, stepping closer, his hand now gripping his baton, the weapon gleaming in the headlights like a promise of violence. "Ma'am," Dawson said, the word a deliberate erasure of her title, a calculated move to strip her of power. "Step out of the vehicle, now." The air crackled with tension, a storm ready to explode. Veronica knew she was on the edge of something deadly, and the night was about to ignite. Veronica's jaw clenched as Dawson's words landed like a slap. "Ma'am, not director, not even Miss Caldwell." The deliberate move to reduce her to nothing, to strip her of the authority she'd fought tooth and nail to earn. She'd faced this before, cops in Harlem calling her girl as a teen, precinct captains dismissing her as a diversity hire in her early days, colleagues whispering she'd slept her way up when she made SAC in Chicago. But now, as the head of the FBI, the insult burned deeper, fueling a fire that had been simmering since her first day on the beat. A fire forged in the crucible of Harlem, where her mother, a nurse who'd stitched up protesters during the civil rights movement, had taught her to stand tall, no matter the odds. "Officer Dawson," she said, her voice low, controlled, but laced with a venom that could cut steel. "You're addressing the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I outrank your entire department. Hell, I outrank your whole county. Step back, provide cause, or I'll have you both in cuffs before the sun comes up. Your move." Her badge gleamed in her hand, a beacon of her authority, but also a target, a challenge to men who saw her as an intruder in their world. Hankins laughed, a harsh, guttural sound that echoed in the night, his sneer twisting into something uglier, something that made her skin crawl. "You hear that, Dawson? She thinks she's untouchable, thinks that badge means something out here." He slammed his fist on her car roof again, the bang reverberating like a thunderclap, making her flinch despite herself, the metal denting slightly under his force. "Get out, girl, or I'll drag you out myself." The slur hit like a punch, her eyes blazing with fury, years of girl fueling her defiance, a word that had followed her from Harlem to D.C., a word that carried the weight of every injustice she'd ever faced. "Girl?" She shot back, her voice a razor, her Harlem drawl sharpening the edge. "I've been called worse by better men than you, Hankins. Try director, it rolls off the tongue nicer and it might save your career. Though, looking at you, I'd say that ship's already sailed." Her defiance was a spark, and Hankins was the gasoline. He yanked her door handle, the metal groaning as he pulled, the lock straining under his force, but Veronica held it shut, her grip iron tight, her heart pounding in her chest like a war drum. "Touch this door again, and I'll have you for assault on a federal officer," she warned, her voice a low growl, her eyes locked on his, searching for a crack in his facade. But all she saw was a man itching for a fight, a man who'd already decided she was his enemy. "I know my rights, and I know yours. Or rather, what's left of them after tonight." Dawson moved in, his hand now off his holster, gripping his baton instead, the weapon gleaming in the headlights like a promise of violence, his face a mask of cold fury. "Enough games," he snarled, raising the baton as if to smash her window, the metal glinting with malicious intent. "You're coming out, one way or another." Before he could swing, headlights pierced the darkness, a third vehicle roaring up, an unmarked SUV with federal plates, its tires screeching as it skidded to a stop. A voice boomed, "Stand down now." Lieutenant Grayson leapt out, his uniform crisp, stars on his collar catching the light, his face a storm of authority and alarm. His eyes widened as he recognized her, his voice sharp with disbelief. "Director Caldwell?" The scene froze, the air thick with shock, the only sound the faint hum of the patrol car's engines and the distant chirp of crickets. Hankins' hand dropped from the door, his face paling, but his sneer lingered, a desperate attempt to hold on to his crumbling bravado. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, glancing at Dawson, who lowered his baton, uncertainty flickering in his eyes for the first time. Grayson stormed forward, his voice a whip, his boots crunching on the gravel as he closed the distance. "What's happening here? Explain yourselves, now." He glared at Hankins and Dawson, then turned to Veronica, his tone softening but urgent, his eyes scanning her for signs of injury. "Director, are you all right? What the hell are these two doing?" Veronica stepped out of the sedan, her badge still in hand, her posture regal, despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins, her suit impeccable even in the chaos. She smoothed her jacket, her dark eyes locked on Grayson, her voice cutting through the night like a blade. "These officers stopped me without cause, Lieutenant. Threatened me with weapons, called me girl. A racial and professional violation that'll cost them their badges. I want their records, and I'm filing with Internal Affairs." Now, her words were a command, her presence a storm, her authority undeniable even on this lonely stretch of highway. Hankins scoffed, his bravado crumbling but not gone, his voice desperate, a man grasping at straws. "She's the suspect. Refused to comply, resisting arrest. We were doing our job." His voice cracked, his eyes darting between Grayson and Veronica, searching for an ally but finding none. Veronica's laugh was sharp, edged with scorn, her Harlem drawl adding a bite to her words. "Suspect? My crime's driving while black and breathing, apparently. Your badge needs a reality check. Hankins, maybe a mirror too, so you can see the fool staring back at you." The crowd, locals drawn by the flashing lights, some on their way to early Veterans Day events, murmured, phones rising to record, their whispers a growing hum of outrage and curiosity. A young man, Jamal, a freelance journalist with a vendetta against corrupt cops, stepped forward from the gathering crowd, his phone's red light blazing as he captured every moment. He was wiry, his hoodie emblazoned with a faded Malcolm X quote, "By any means necessary," his eyes sharp with purpose. "Got it all on video, officers," he called, his voice steady, a grin tugging at his lips. "You're done, slur and all." Hankins lunged at Jamal, his face contorted with rage, his hand reaching for the phone. "Turn that off, punk, or I'll—" Veronica intercepted, stepping between them, shoving her badge in his face, her voice a growl that stopped him cold. "Touch him, and I'll bury you for obstruction, on top of harassment, assault, and whatever else I can pin on you by breakfast." Hankins froze, his eyes wild, caught between rage and fear, his hand hovering mid-air, trembling with indecision. Dawson shifted, his baton still in hand, but Grayson roared, "Back off, both of you. Now." His voice was a thunderclap, his hand on his own holster, ready to draw if needed. He turned to Veronica, his face grim, his voice low but firm. "Director, I'm sorry, this ends here. Their files are yours, full transparency. I'll personally see to it." She nodded, her gaze ice cold, her voice a promise. "If you think I'll let this slide, Lieutenant, you don't know me. I want their badges on my desk by morning, and I want every second of their disciplinary history. They're done." Her words were a death knell, her authority a storm that even the night couldn't swallow. Jamal handed her the footage, his grin widening as he met her gaze, respect shining in his eyes. "For the record, Director, you're a beast. They didn't stand a chance." Hankins was cuffed, still raging as Grayson's men dragged him to the patrol car. "Arresting me? She's the target. You're making a mistake." His voice was a desperate howl, but Veronica's smirk was a blade, her words dripping with me as she watched him go. "Your career just hit the skids, officer. Enjoy the cage. It's got better views than your patrol car." As Hankins was dragged off, Dawson following in silence, a gunshot cracked through the night. Hankins's partner, hidden in the shadows of the second patrol car, fired a warning shot into the air. The muzzle flash lighting up the darkness like a lightning strike. The crowd screamed, scattering like leaves in a storm, some diving to the ground, others running for their cars. Veronica ducked behind her sedan, her heart slamming against her ribs, her hand instinctively reaching for the Glock she kept holstered under her seat, her training kicking into overdrive. Grayson tackled the shooter, a wiry man with a shaved head and a sneer that mirrored Hankins, wrestling the gun from his hands as they hit the gravel. "Stand down," Grayson yelled, pinning the man to the ground, his knee on the shooter's back as he cuffed him, the metal clicking with a finality that echoed in the night. More sirens wailed in the distance, reinforcements arriving, their lights painting the scene in a chaotic dance of red and blue. Veronica rose, her Glock in hand but lowered, her breath steadying as she scanned the chaos, her eyes locking on Grayson. "Get him secured, Lieutenant," she ordered, her voice a command, her presence a storm. "And I want to know who else is involved. This isn't over." The night had turned into a war zone, and Veronica knew this was just the beginning. Dawn broke over St. Louis with a chaos that could have shaken the foundations of the nation's capital. News channels blared headlines that dominated every network. FBI director survives cop ambush on Route 66. Gunshot caught on camera. Rogue cops target Director Caldwell. Jamal's video, now including the gunshot, Hankins' slur, and Veronica's unyielding defiance, hit 5 million views by noon, spreading like wildfire across social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook, where hashtags like #JusticeOn66 and Caldwell stands began to trend. Her office at the FBI's St. Louis field office became a war room, phones ringing off the hook, emails flooding in, congressmen posturing with feigned concern, allies pledging unwavering support, enemies sharpening their knives with whispered threats of investigations into her conduct. Veronica stood by the window of her temporary office, the St. Louis skyline a gray blur outside, her hands clenched around a steaming cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, the bitter taste lingering on her tongue. She hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. Her mind was a battlefield, plotting her next move, her eyes scanning the horizon for the next attack. Her team buzzed around her, analysts pulling records, agents coordinating with local PD, their voices a low hum of urgency. She'd survived the night, but the war was just starting. Her appointment had been a lightning rod. First black woman as FBI director, a former Harlem detective who'd busted cartels, cleaned house in her own agency, and pushed for reforms that had made her a target. She'd fired corrupt agents, demanded transparency, and made enemies in high places. Men like Captain Ellis, a St. Louis PD veteran with a history of brutality and a grudge against her for exposing his precinct's laundry list of complaints, all buried by a complicit system. Her assistant, Marla, a sharp-eyed woman who'd been with her since her Harlem days, burst into the room, her tablet glowing with updates, her face a mix of determination and worry. "Director, we've got a hit," she said, her voice urgent as she tapped the screen, pulling up grainy surveillance footage from a gas station near Route 66. Ellis was recorded on a burner phone, ordering the stop, said you were getting too close to his operation, his exact words. Veronica's eyes narrowed, her voice low, a storm brewing beneath the surface. "Close to what, Marla? What's he hiding?" She set the coffee down, her movements deliberate, her mind racing as she leaned over the tablet, her eyes scanning the footage. Ellis was a hulking figure, his face shadowed by a baseball cap, but his voice was unmistakable, a gravelly snarl that sent a shiver down her spine. "She's digging too deep. Stop her tonight or we're done." Marla tapped the screen again, pulling up a second file, a manifest from a shipping company tied to the St. Louis PD's evidence locker. Weapons trafficking. Military-grade, assault rifles, C4 the works. They're using local cops as muscle, funneling guns to a terror cell. The same cell you briefed on yesterday. Veronica's blood ran cold, the pieces clicking into place like a loaded gun. The briefing had mentioned law enforcement ties. But this was a hydra, its heads multiplying with every strike, its roots buried deep in the system she'd sworn to clean. A call shattered her focus, an unknown number flashing on her phone. She answered, her voice clipped, her senses on high alert. "Caldwell." A pause, then Jamal's voice, urgent and breathless, crackling through the line. "Director, it's me, Jamal. I've got more, bigger fish. They're moving tonight, a warehouse 10 miles out on Route 66. Crates, armed guards. I can't get closer without backup. They'll kill me if they spot me." Her pulse spiked, her mind racing as she grabbed a pen, scribbling the coordinates he whispered. An abandoned warehouse just off the highway, a stone's throw from her ambush the night before. "Stay low, Jamal," she ordered, her voice a command, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Don't move. I'm coming." She hung up, her heart pounding as she turned to Marla, her voice sharp. "Get SWAT on the line, full tactical team now. We've got a live op." Her team mobilized in a flurry of activity, agents in tactical gear, SWAT on speed dial, radios crackling with orders. Veronica led the convoy herself, her sedan screaming down Route 66, the coordinates burning in her mind, her Glock resting on the passenger seat, a silent promise of retribution. The warehouse loomed in the distance, a hulking silhouette against the twilight, its rusted walls hiding a nest of vipers, its broken windows glinting like the eyes of a predator. They breached the perimeter under the cover of dusk, shadows moving in the dark. Armed men, not cops, guarding crates stamped with military insignias, their voices low as they loaded a truck. A shout. Feds, and the night erupted into chaos. Bullets pinged off steel, Veronica's team returning fire with precision, their muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness like a deadly fireworks show. She spotted Ellis, barking orders from a catwalk above, his face twisted with rage, a rifle slung over his shoulder. She sprinted through the chaos, dodging a hail of gunfire, her Glock steady as she climbed a rusted ladder, her boots clanging against the metal, her breath ragged but controlled. Ellis saw her coming, his eyes widening as he raised his rifle, but Veronica was faster. She fired a single shot, the bullet slamming into his leg, sending him crashing to the catwalk with a scream, his weapon clattering to the floor below. She was on him in seconds, her knee pinning his chest, her Glock pressed to his temple, her voice a growl as she cuffed him with her free hand. "You're done, Ellis," she hissed, her eyes blazing with a fury that had been building for years. "Your little empire ends tonight, right here, right now." He spat blood, sneering through the pain, his voice a snarl. "You'll never last, Caldwell. They'll bury you. They always do." She smirked, her eyes cold, her voice a promise. "They've been trying since I was born, Ellis. I'm still here, and you're not." The ring was dismantled. Crates of assault rifles, C4, enough explosives to level a city block, a plot to arm the terror cell for a Veterans Day attack on the St. Louis Memorial. Ellis was hauled off in cuffs, his operation exposed, but the fallout was just beginning, a storm that would shake the nation to its core. By Veterans Day, the scandal had consumed the nation, dominating every news cycle, every conversation, every corner of social media. Justice on 66 trended on Twitter, tying Route 66 to Veronica's stand, a symbol of resistance against corruption that resonated from St. Louis to Los Angeles. News outlets ran 24/7 coverage. Hankins, Dawson, and Ellis faced trials, their rings tentacles reaching into 3 states, their arrests just the tip of a much larger iceberg. Jamal's footage hit 10 million views, his grainy video of the roadside ambush, complete with Hankins's slur, the gunshot, and Veronica's unyielding defiance, going viral alongside the warehouse raid, where SWAT body cams captured her takedown of Ellis in vivid detail. The public rallied. Protests erupted outside precincts across the Midwest. Veterans saluted her at memorials. Citizens demanded reform with a fervor that hadn't been seen since the Ferguson unrest a year prior. Veronica stood at a St. Louis Veterans Day ceremony, the air crisp with the scent of gunpowder from a 21-gun salute. The crowd a sea of faces, vets in uniform, families clutching flags, activists holding signs that read, "Caldwell stands for us." She'd been invited to speak, her presence a beacon for those who'd fought for justice, on battlefields and in streets, from Vietnam to Ferguson. She stepped to the podium, her suit impeccable, her badge gleaming, her voice steady as she addressed the crowd, her words carrying the weight of her journey, from Harlem to D.C., from girl to director. Today, we honor sacrifice, those who gave their lives for freedom, for justice, for a nation that promises equality but doesn't always deliver. What happened on Route 66 wasn't just an attack on me. It was an attack on every citizen who dares to demand better, who dares to stand up to power when it's wrong. I'm a black woman from Harlem, raised by a mother who stitched up protesters while dodging tear gas, taught to fight by a father who marched with Dr. King. I've been called girl my whole life, told I don't belong, told I can't lead. But I'm still here, and I'll keep fighting. For those who can't, for those who won't be silenced, for every vet who bled for this country, for every citizen who deserves better. We fight on. For them. The crowd erupted, a roar of applause that shook the ground, phones capturing every word, the hashtag Caldwell stands exploding online, trending alongside Justice on 66 and Route 66 reckoning. Veterans saluted, some with tears in their eyes, their hands trembling as they clapped, their faces a mix of pride and pain. Families waved flags, activists chanted her name, and children held up signs with her face, a symbol of hope in a nation still grappling with its demons. But the threats didn't stop. Burned cars were found outside her hotel. Dead drops with photos of her mother's Harlem apartment slipped under her door. Whispers of a cover-up, reaching the highest levels of law enforcement. Her phone buzzed as she left the ceremony, her heels clicking on the pavement, her Glock still holstered at her side, a constant reminder of the war she was fighting. She answered, her voice clipped, her senses on high alert. "Caldwell." Jamal's voice came through, a whisper, his tone urgent and laced with fear. "Director, it's me, Jamal. They're mobilizing a hit squad tonight. They're coming for you, for me, for anyone who knows. Be ready." His words were a jolt, her heart pounding as she glanced at the darkening sky, the St. Louis skyline fading into twilight, the stars above cold and unyielding. She nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon, her hand resting on her Glock, her voice a promise that carried the weight of her past and the fire of her future. "Let them come, Jamal," she said, her tone steady, her resolve unbreakable. "I've been ready my whole life, since the first time a cop called me girl and thought I'd break. They don't know who they're dealing with." The storm wasn't over. It was a hurricane, and Veronica Caldwell was its eye, a force of nature forged in Harlem, tempered by injustice, and ready to fight until the end. Veronica's roadside stand on Route 66 ignited a revolution that rippled across America. Hankins, Dawson, and Ellis faced decades behind bars, their ring dismantled, but the battle for justice raged on. A war against a system that had protected men like them for too long. Jamal's videos, the roadside ambush, the gunshot, the warehouse raid, hit 15 million views. Chap Justice on 66, a rallying cry tying Route 66 to resistance, a symbol of defiance that echoed from St. Louis to the nation's capital. Veterans Day 2015 ended with fireworks over St. Louis, the sky glowing with bursts of red, white, and blue, honoring sacrifice and the unyielding fight for justice. YouTube clips soared, captioned, "FBI boss survives cop ambush. Director Caldwell takes down corrupt cops. History carved her name in stone. Power bends to truth, and a Harlem warrior redefined what a badge could mean." The storm roared on, but Veronica stood unbowed, a beacon of resistance, ready for whatever came next.